How's it going, everybody? It's Gregor, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the French and how they could be featured in World of Warships. And for goodness sake, if France can have a tech tree in World of Tanks, I'm pretty sure they can have a tech tree in this game. From the Spad fighter plane to the Leclerc main battle tank, it would seem that the French have always been a little bit obsessed with speed. Many of their warships throughout the course of the 20th century reflect this. The French had a good deal of, quote, fast battleships and destroyers, although many of their cruisers weren't as fast compared to other cruiser designs. The French Navy's main efforts during the First World War were largely overshadowed, since France focused more of its efforts to the land and air war, as the Brits did most of the fighting at sea. To put it frankly, the French made a habit of playing catch-up, building vessels to counter currently existing ones at the time, many of the Italians. Let's start with battleships like we usually do. As I said, France had a lot of what were considered fast battleships. We'll get to those in a bit, but first, what would start the line? Typically at Tier 3 lies the first Dreadnought of the respective nation it came from, and I don't think France would be an exception. This is the Corvette class Dreadnought, built in response to the well-known HMS Dreadnought. Armor leaves some aspects to be desired, but it's a little bit faster than the South Carolina and the Kawasaki. Armament consists of 6 dual turrets arranged in a bit of an odd configuration, as you can see here, 2 in the front and back, and 1 wing turret for each side, standard 305mm. However, the thing to note about this ship more so would be its secondary armament, armed with 22 138mm guns, which is a lot, obviously. I suspect that this ship will perform best when up close and personal then. It'll need a good deal of hit points to balance its lackluster armor characteristics. Perhaps not suited to going after other battleships of the same tier, it could fare well against cruisers and destroyers. Moving on to Tier 4, we arrive at one of France's most well-known battleships, the Bretagne Super Dreadnought, commissioned in 1916. 3 of the Bretagne class were built that all survived the course of the First World War. These ships were primarily concerned with containing the Austro-Hungarian Navy in the Adriatic Sea. As built, the Bretagne had 5 turrets, dual-barreled with 340mm guns, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 1 smack dab in the middle. Her secondaries were also particularly powerful. However, on one version of this ship, the Lorraine, the middle turret was removed to make way for more anti-aircraft armament. The armor of the Bretagne compared to her contemporaries wasn't particularly outstanding, though not terrible, and like other super dreadnoughts, she wasn't particularly maneuverable either. A Bretagne in World of Warships would be known for its versatile firepower. Her main battery was good and she was armed to the teeth with secondaries. Overall, a very well-balanced battleship. Mid-tier is a bit of a hassle in terms of finding designs that existed in reality, not just on the drawing board. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to stick to reality, and so following the Bretagne was a ship I'd probably put at Tier 6, the Dunkirk class built in the 1930s. In the usual fashion of interwar battleship design, the Dunkirk was built to counter the German Deutschland class of ships. Here is where the French obsession with quad turrets starts. 2 quadruple-barreled 13-inch guns mounted forward of the superstructure, business end up front like the Nelson, which provided the design basis of a number of French naval architects. Less guns than its contemporaries total. This is where the French battleships also pick up the pace at about 30 knots. A fair amount of secondaries and decent AA as well. A glance at the armor thickness of the Dunkirk may lead some to call it a bit underwhelming, but that really isn't the case. For instance, this ship's belt armor was inclined, and the magazine was further protected by a turtle back, as well as a splinter deck. There's a lot of sloping and lots of effective armor thickness. Overall, a very, very tough ship. In-game, the only real downsides to the Dunkirk then would be small shell caliber that could probably be mitigated by her penetration values and reload speed. Overall, a decent battleship for Tier 6. Let's finish up with late tier. What followed the Dunkirk was the Richelieu class, built to counter the fearsome Italian Vittorio Veneto class battleships, which in turn were built to counter the Dunkirk. Funny how that works. The Richelieu is most certainly France's most powerful battleship, and I'm certain it's going to make a guaranteed appearance in a French battleship line. Richelieu was fitted with a very, very thick armor belt of a little over 340mm, which is even thicker than the Tirpitz. The quad turrets are back once more, and like the Dunkirk, 2 of them are placed forward of the superstructure, and would be armed with 380mm guns, which is standard for a Tier 8 battleship. As usual, she'd also be fairly fast for a battleship with a top speed of 30 knots. Her AA was also quite good. This would be a very potent vessel indeed. She'd be a high-profile target, though, especially considering her tall superstructure, and would be very easy to spot. Aside from that, I leave it to Wargaming to find something else underwhelming about this ship to balance it out. But at the end of the day, this thing would probably be the reason people go down the French battleship line. To finish off the line, there are a number of paper ships. There's the Alsace class, which was supposed to replace the Richelieu in time, but this plan never came into fruition. She's basically an upgrade of that ship though, equipped with another quad turret in the back for a total of 12 guns, as well as some torpedo tubes. Overall then, I imagine French battleships would start out as effective cruiser and destroyer killers, not exactly suited to brawling with other battleships but making up for that in straight line speed, then getting a potent set of armor and good gun layouts that would make them very good at getting up close and personal with the enemy. They seem like they'd be a great deal of fun to play, just don't let anybody get behind you. Anyway, unfortunately, that's where most of your attention concerning the French wanes, but I'll talk about other ships nonetheless. Let's start with cruisers. Strangely enough, the cruiser line would be where things start to slow down a bit for the French, at least if you were to compare speed among other cruisers. A tier 4 or 5 would likely be the Duguay-Trion, built to counter Italian vessels coming into play at the time, and inspired by the American Omaha class. They were the first major French warships to be built following the First World War. Her speed wouldn't really be anything special, around 30 knots in a straight line, comparable to the Svetlana and the Karlsruhe. The ships were also lightly armored. In terms of armament, 8 6-inch guns mounted in 4 dual-barreled turrets and 4 triple torpedo-tubed launchers. Overall, this ship might be a bit underwhelming, but I can't see the thing fitting at tier 3, so tier 4 seems like the only logical place to put it. She's slow, and her armor isn't very good, so her guns and torpedoes will have to make up for it. This wouldn't be the reason people go down the French cruiser line though, they'd probably be eyeballing later tiers. A logical choice for tier 6 in my opinion would be the Emile Bertin, a light cruiser similar to the German Nuremberg, with 3 triple-barreled turrets, 2 of them up front mounted with 6-inch guns like any other tier 6 light cruiser. She also has 2 triple-tube torpedo launchers, and although her armor is underwhelming, what would further distinguish this ship would be potent anti-aircraft capabilities. Her speed is also comparable to other tier 6 cruisers at around 34 knots in a straight line, though in some trials she was reported to reach speeds of 40 knots. I don't know if Wargaming would find that figure and balance it out according to such. Still, even at a lower speed, all in all, a very well-balanced tier 6 cruiser. I'd play her often as a support ship thanks to a good array of anti-aircraft guns. The most reasonable late-tier French cruiser then I can think of would be the Algieri class, likely at tier 8. She was built in response to the Italian Zara class. Algieri was one of the last treaty cruisers to be built and one of the most powerful. As far as other cruisers are concerned, she had a very thick armor belt for a change. Her armament consisted of 4 dual-barreled turrets mounted with 203mm guns, like other tier 8 cruisers, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. She also had 3 torpedo tubes facing both sides of the ship. Another thing to note is a potent set of secondary batteries of 6 dual-barreled 100mm turrets. That's a lot of punch for a cruiser at tier 8. Overall, the Algieri would be a solid tier 8 brawling heavy cruiser. She can get up close and personal with most of the ships that she comes across aside from battleships. My thoughts on very late tier French cruisers are a bit limited, since I can't think of any ships that would fit the criteria. Good luck, Wargaming. In any event, I think we're better off talking about the destroyers that the French had to offer, and there are some unique ones, believe me. Mid to late tier French destroyers are a lot like the Russians, high caliber, fast. Tier 5 would likely host the Chacal, which hosted pretty basic development history. They were built primarily as fleet scouts. She'd be the slowest of Tier 5 destroyers at 35.5 knots, and she was only equipped with 2 torpedo tubes. So some would probably find her a strange addition to the game, but she's very well armed with 5 130mm guns, comparable weaponry to the Gnevny, which has 4 of these. If anything, the Chacal is a gunboat, in some ways functioning more like a light cruiser than a destroyer. I suppose she'd be fine at tier 5, but what I'd be more interested to see would be the Fantasca class, quite literally the fastest destroyer ever freaking made. Fantasca was a ship capable of reaching a speed of 45 knots, which is obviously absolutely ridiculous. Imagine this thing with its boost. In addition to 5 138mm guns, 2 mounted forwards and 3 mounted in the back, for obvious reasons. She also had 9 torpedo tubes. I suppose the ship will find its place at around tier 8 or at tier 9. This ship would be the king of hit and run. Come in fast, take some shots, drop its torpedoes, then get the hell out of there, while firing back with its guns in the back. Likely a higher risk, high reward kind of playstyle that I can get behind. Surely this will be the reason people go down a French destroyer line. But overall, that is a basic idea of what you could expect from a French tech tree. Though France was more well known for its land and air forces during the First World War and never got to use most of its navy in the Second World War, they blew up most of them when the Germans invaded, I think the designs that I've shown to you recently exhibit a good deal of smart engineering and would serve as unique and interesting content for World of Warships. It's a little bit down the line from now, and I'm sure we'll see the British tech tree before we see the French, but it's worth talking about nonetheless. If you like this video, do subscribe for more content like this and give the video a like. It really does go a long way. The next speculation video I'll be doing will cover the Italians. I also have a plethora of World of Warships speculation content here for you to peruse if you're so inclined, including a video on British ships and a video on German battleships. Until next time though, thanks so much for watching.